4, 3.
Good evening. The time right now is 7:02 p.m. and today's date is Thursday, April 29th, 2021. I call this public hearing from the Parking and Curb Management Group of the SFMTA to order. My name is Rudy Sebastian, and I am a hearing officer with the City and County of San Francisco. I will be facilitating this public hearing. I want everyone in attendance to know that audio and video from today's hearing is being recorded. These public hearings are normally conducted at City Hall, so I want to thank everyone right now for joining us via video or audio conferencing. If you are joining us online via video conference, you can view shared materials presented during today's public hearing. However, if you would like to make a public comment, you still have to dial in using the following phone number: 1-888-363-4734. Again, that number is 1-888-363-4734. Then you will enter the code 7014320#. Again, that code is 7014320#. When I open the phone line for public comment, you will press 1, then 0 to be placed in the queue for public comment. Each caller will have a maximum of 2 minutes. To help with the joining me today are Hank Wilson, Catherine Studwell, and Ronell Cooper. So at this moment, I'd like to take time to thank our IT department who is providing support for today's meeting. Now I will turn it over to Hank, Catherine, and Ronell to provide us with an overview of the meeting itself.
Thanks very much, Rudy. I really appreciate it, and thank you all for being here. My name is Hank Wilson. I lead the curb management team at the SFMTA. Kathy and Ronell are my colleagues and have done a lot of work over the past couple of years working with the community, merchant groups, and others to develop a proposal for parking and curb management in Hayes Valley, and we're excited to present that to you today. This is the second one of these big virtual meetings that we've had for this project. The previous one was on February 17th, so maybe you've been here before. Glad that you're here. It means that you got a postcard or a mailer or saw our postings on telephone poles in the area, something like that. So pretty soon I'm going to turn it over to Kathy and Ronell to do the presentation. Because we are in a virtual setting, we have this live event Q&A. So if you have questions or comments that you want to put in the chat, you can do that. I'll be reviewing that. I'll be moderating it, and I will publish as many as I can. And then once the presentations are done, we'll talk about some of the comments that we got before the hearing started. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can from the Q&A. And then once that's done, we will turn it over to the phone line for people to make comments or ask questions. And then we'll try to answer all of those questions until it's time for everyone to go home and go to bed. But thank you again for the time. And with that, I will turn it over to Kathy.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm just switching screens now so that everybody can see the presentation. Hopefully this is the right one. Again, I'm Kathy Studwell. Ronell Cooper and I worked with residents and merchants in the area to put this plan together. We've been working, like Hank said, over 2 years. I want to remind everyone that at the end of the presentation, we'll be opening the phone lines. So if you prefer to call in with a question or comment, you would call the number on the screen. We're going to repeat this number at the end of the presentation. This effort, we worked closely with the Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association. We worked with a working group, members of the association, and gave many presentations to the association's Transportation and Planning Committee. So I want to thank them for their hard work and their commitment. This presentation, if you were here for February 17th community meeting, A lot of this information will be similar, familiar to you. We'll start with going over the, why are we doing this planning process? Why is it needed? What are some of the planning issues that were presented? What was the process we took, and how did we conduct our public outreach? How did we get public input and comment on our planning process? The plan is going to be divided into two major sections. One section devoted to policies related to residential permit parking, and another section related to curb management, especially changes on Hayes Street having to do with loading zones and parking. We'll go over the next steps in the process and then open it up for questions and comments. So in terms of the purpose of the planning process, we really, this is really about not only implementing the Market Octavia plan that was developed by this neighborhood back in 2009 or so, but also to implement parts of the MTA strategic plan having to do with promoting active transportation and alternatives to driving alone. It's really about meeting sustainability goals that require reduced vehicle use, addressing increasing pressure on the existing curb due to continued new development and population growth, and to respond to increased requests for RPP area expansion. It's also about supporting local businesses so they continue to thrive or regain the vitality that they knew about a year ago. And again, I wanted to just present some of the strategic plan objectives of our agency having to do with making transit and other sustainable modes the most attractive options for getting around the city. And like I said, one of the reasons for initiating this planning process is to implement our strategic plan. As you may have known, if you've been here over a decade or so, the Central Freeway actually used to come into Hayes Valley and divide the neighborhood. As a result of this, the highway, it was quite blighted. The area was a little bit run down. And after the earthquake of '89, it was torn down permanently, and it opened up a lot of property to new development. So what you see now in Hayes Valley is a result of tearing down that highway and opening the area up to a lot of new, exciting development, creating a very vibrant commercial corridor along Hayes Street. And as a result of these changes, a result of this new development, this growth, this increasing vitality, attracting shoppers and customers from throughout the region, really, it creates a lot of pressure on the available parking. And it's no longer just a residential area. So having residential permit parking throughout the neighborhood doesn't really make sense anymore. We need to add more flexibility to accommodate the folks coming in, the customers, the businesses, the higher density housing, the various activities that are going on in the evenings. So as I said, this planning process is about addressing the demand, increasing demand on limited curb space, and the need for additional flexibility. Now we have residential and commercial mixed together. So what was our process? We've been doing this, as we said earlier, over 2 years. We began back in 2018 after finishing up the residential permit parking evaluation and reform project. And this is an outgrowth of that. We invited the Hayes Valley neighborhood to work with us on this. They were eager to do so. We met with them, a working group of people from all backgrounds, businesses, residents, people who take transit, people who ride bikes, people who drive cars, people with families, people without families. So over nearly a 2-year process. We also made presentations to the Transportation and Planning Committee. We got tremendous feedback in those meetings as well. In addition, we put together a project website. We have sent out many updates. We put together an interactive survey back in the fall of 2019. You may have received one of our postcards inviting you to participate in that survey. 500 of your neighbors did so, and that generated quite a lot of input on questions concerning safer streets and residential parking. And many of you might have attended our community meeting where we presented the draft proposal for parking and curb management back on February 17th. We had somewhere between 40 and 50 participants at that meeting. So what's the plan? Like I said earlier, it's divided really into two major components. I will be discussing the residential permit parking policies that we're proposing, and Raynell will be discussing the curb management policies, the extended meter hours, the parking and loading modifications on Hayes Street. In terms of residential permit parking, we're proposing to expand the RPP area boundaries, actually forming a new RPP area, adding pay or permit parking, which adds a lot of flexibility for residents, their visitors, their service providers, as well as for businesses, and lowering permit purchase limits. So the existing RPP areas, what I'm presenting here is a map that shows Hayes Valley outlined in the black dashed line. You know, on the east is Van Ness, on the north is McAllister, on the west is Fillmore or Webster, and on the south is Market. As you can see on the north end, part of Hayes Valley is in Area R, RPP Area R, and the southern part of Hayes Valley is in RPP Area S. Area S is the largest area in the city. It has over 10,000 permit holders. It is over a square mile, 1 1/3 square miles. It reaches all the way down as far as Noe Valley. And what that does is it enables residents of Castro Valley, Noe Valley, to drive into Hayes Valley, park, and go to work, either hopping on the 5 Fulton and going downtown, or working at City Hall or other city or performing arts venues. So that brings additional cars into the area that makes it more difficult for residents and businesses to find parking here. So we want to address that issue and make it easier for folks to find parking. We also want to address the fact that with all the new development, the new senior centers, the senior housing, the new subsidized housing, a lot of this new housing is built with no on-site parking. And so they rely on street parking, but they are not yet eligible for RPP. And part of this plan is to bring them into the neighborhood and be 100% full Hayes Valley residents. So what we're proposing is a new RPP area. So we take those portions of Area R and Area S and merge them into one new area. We're going to call it HV. And we've added about 6 new blocks. So there are about 6 blocks that currently were not in either Area R or Area S, and we're adding them to this new Area HV. This will create consistency in terms of hours and days of enforcement. Parts of the area now go until 9 p.m. Other parts, enforcement stops at 6 p.m. So we want to make this uniform. So we're proposing to have RPP areas enforced Monday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. We found that there is great demand for extending enforcement to Saturday as well as to 9 p.m. The neighborhood's proximity to the Performing Arts Center venues and to the vibrant Hayes Street corridor, the nightlife, etc., requires that RPP be enforced later into the evening so that folks actually can find parking when they come home from work. The other thing that we're proposing along with expanding RPP is limiting the number of permits provided per household. By doing so, this enables us to enable, most of the residents of the area to have access to RPP permits. We will limit permits to 1 per household, except that if you have a caregiver, a medical care provider, or a child care provider, there are permits for them and they will not count towards the 1 per household limit. In addition, if you have a second driver who drives a motorcycle, they will not count towards the 1 per household limit. If there are additional drivers in the household, they can ask for additional permits. What will happen is the agency will conduct an occupancy survey, a parking occupancy survey, to see if there's available parking in the area. And if there is, you will be allowed to purchase an additional permit. That second permit will cost more than the first permit, but you will be able to get that additional permit. So what we're proposing here is illustrated on this map. There is a lot of information on this map. I wish I could make this bigger so that all of you could see. So I'm going to read through the legend so that it's easy for everyone, or easier for everyone to understand. So every street with blue lines on it, those blue lines represent existing metered parking. Any dashed blue lines means new metered parking is being proposed, and that's along Laguna and 1 block along Linden. Wherever you see green lines, that's existing residential permit parking. And where you see dashed green lines, that's where we're proposing to expand it. The biggest change probably is where you see these purple dashed lines. This is where we are converting about 31 block faces from residential permit parking to pay or permit parking. And I will explain what pay or permit parking means on the very next slide. So in addition, what you see on this map are these bright green dashed lines that extend beyond the boundaries of Hayes Valley. And what those are, what we call buffer zones. So this new RPP area, HV, actually butts up or is adjacent to other existing RPP areas. To the north, there's RPP area R. To the west, it's area Q. And to the south and west is area S. And whenever area HV abuts another area, there will be a buffer zone that is about 2 blocks long that allows folks with either area S or area HV permits to park on those blocks. The same would be true in area R at McAllister and north of there. So if you have either an R or an HV permit, you could park there, and the same with area Q. So this expands the parking area if you're living on the boundary. But the whole purpose of doing this, making this brand new area, is actually to give Hayes Valley residents greater access to parking, more availability within the area. So in terms of pay or permit parking, it's exactly the same as residential parking if you have a permit. So with residential permit parking, residents with permits are exempt from any time limits. Visitors can park for free for 2 hours, but they have to move their vehicle before that 2 hours is up, and they have to move it a full block, which is a great inconvenience for visitors, for service providers like your plumber or your electrician, your home cleaner or gardener. So it's, you know, they've got to go out and move their car to not get a citation. Typically, it's enforced between 8 and 6 in some areas until 9 p.m. And for those visitors, you can purchase a visitor permit. A one-day visitor permit allows them to park all day. But you've got to purchase those in advance. A lot of people purchase those when they renew their permits. They can purchase up to 20 a year, but it's a bit of an inconvenience. The alternative is pay or permit parking. This is a new parking management tool that was adopted by our board of directors back in 2018. Provides a lot more flexibility. Residents with permits are exempt from any time limits. You don't have to pay anything. Your permit allows you to park on any block with this signage. The signage that you see here on the screen that says pay to park except area whatever permits. And in this case, it'll say except HV permits. Visitors, on the other hand, and they pay for the time they need. There's no time limit. They have a lot of flexibility in different ways to pay. They could pay by phone, they could pay by card, they could pay by coin. No need for visitor permits, no need to move your car every 2 hours. So in that regard, it serves not only the visitors to the residents, but also customers for businesses or business employees that need to drive into work that day. Maybe they have childcare or some doctor's appointment or something and they need their car. So it just provides the added flexibility that a mixed use or a commercial and residential area demands. I'm going to turn it over to Raynell now to talk about curb management. And remember, at the end of the presentation, you will have an opportunity to ask questions, make comments. So Raynell, it's yours.
Thank you, Kathy. Great start. Yeah, so curb management has always been a real challenge in San Francisco. As you can see from this video from the turn of the century, everyone's trying to find a place to get over and get out of the way of the traffic. Clearly a long-term trend here in the city. Many users are competing for curb space, and the new curb uses are growing and expanding. We've seen, leading up into the pandemic, and then starting to pick up once again. We're starting to see all sorts of deliveries to businesses, deliveries to homes, all sorts of pickup and drop-off activity, as well as paratransit activity throughout the neighborhood. Go to the next slide. And these can create a serious problem. The lack of loading space creates safety hazards for vulnerable road users, for pedestrians, for cyclists. It also can create transit delays, specifically when the 21 Hayes comes back. We will want to sort of ensure it's smooth passage through the neighborhood. And these are kind of at the core of our curb management strategy, which was released in February of last year, which kind of is meant to take a look at the best designs for loading zones and kind of get a better understanding of how to make loading zones work best for the communities that they serve. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about the proposed parking changes that are kind of affecting, that are meant to help with the businesses and kind of work with the commercial areas and the commercial districts in Hayes Valley. So we're converting some, we're creating some metered parking. We've got on Laguna between Fell and Ivy, so the block south of Hayes, as well as the half block north of Hayes, as well as the east side of Goff between Fulton and McAllister. That is becoming metered parking as well. It's right now in terms of just metered parking in this plan. Just one other block, the block of Linden between Goff and Franklin. Another important part of this proposal is the extended meter hours. And our meter hours in the city have kind of always been in this very tight kind of Monday to Saturday 9 to 6 window, and that doesn't fully encapsulate the entire time that these businesses operate. So extending the meters into the evening, as well as having them run on Sunday closer to the business hours of the businesses in the neighborhood, that's intended to help kind of create that turnover. Important thing to remember about parking meters when they first were invented in the 1930s in Oklahoma City was that they were meant for businesses to be able to kind of, you know, get people in, get people out, and create turnover, and that's kind of that's definitely the main goal of this proposal, and this is part of a longer ongoing project of finding neighborhoods that are good suitable matches for extended meters. One other thing that we're going to be working on is as part of this proposal. You can go to the next slide, Kathy.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. One other part of this is is curb changes. The curb changes proposal on 3 blocks of Hayes Street. And these are aligned, as I mentioned, with the curb management strategy. There's a lot of important, basically there's a lot of loading zones currently in the city and on Hayes Street that don't do their job super well. Loading zones oftentimes are tailored specifically to one business's specific purpose, but we've come to understand that a loading zone is going to get used by every person coming to the neighborhood and any sort of delivery vehicle, no matter whether or not it's going to the business that requested that zone. So adding a few more zones and working on the better placement of zones, and the focus is on the 3 blocks of Hayes Street. There's also a few very small changes on Octavia that I'll talk about. So going east to west, starting the 300 block from Franklin to Goff, and these diagrams are available on our website. I'm not going to go into full detail on each of these, but I think that this block is kind of emblematic of some of the changes that we're looking to do. You notice in the current on the southeast corner near where the Grove was, there was just this one small commercial loading zone space, and what we found is that single space commercial loading zone spaces do not do the job as well as having more space. So adding a space to that zone will make it more effective. We'll get more commercial deliveries off of the street. We're also looking at expanding passenger loading zones for similar reasons. We noticed that single space passenger loading zones, it's pretty infrequent that somebody picking somebody off or dropping somebody off is going to parallel park into a space just to do a pickup and drop off. So managing those zones is important as well. On this block in particular, we also had, in terms of our interactions with the businesses, there's motorcycle parking on this block that is not being super highly utilized, that is being returned to regular vehicle parking. We could go to the next block, the 400 block. In the 400 block, before the pandemic, this was really the epicenter of a lot of the pickups and drop-offs and a lot of the loading activity that we've been seeing in this area, and there really wasn't much space for it on this block. There were just a few zones here or there scattered about, and the shared spaces have also kind of played a role in taking away even more of those zones. So the proposal is to add a passenger loading zone on both sides of Hayes, on the south side in front of the proxy space right behind the big movie screen. And then as well on the north side between the 2 shared spaces that are currently there on the north side. We're also adding 6-wheel, or actually moving the 6-wheel commercial loading. So it's a special loading zone type for larger trucks, and this is great to be able to get them kind of out of the moving traffic, and be able to make the deliveries that they need to make. And we'll go over to the 500 block now. So the 500 block, we're adding some more zones: the metered commercial loading zone and passenger zone on the west end of the block, and then on the east end of the block, some more loading as well, passenger loading and commercial loading, to help ease congestion in around that major intersection. There's also a blue zone right there. Currently, we received a complaint about the efficacy of that particular blue zone, given the arrangement near there. So we, as part of that project, we're moving the blue zone around the corner. So that blue zone will be on Octavia, on the first space south of Ivy, on the west side of Octavia. And there's also a currently existing passenger loading zone on Octavia, on the block north of Hayes. That it's in the middle of the block. It served a travel agent that is no longer there. So we're moving that loading zone to the corner. So we're moving that south to the corner of Octavia and Hayes. And yeah, just another note on these: with the shared spaces are not kind of within the scope of this plan. We did our best to sort of plan around them. We don't really know. I guess it's coming up very soon. The next few weeks between our board and the Board of Supervisors discussions of the permanence of that program. But we did our best to kind of work around those, assuming that they will be here for a while.
So thank you, Raynell. Wow, a lot of great, exciting changes ahead on Hayes Street. So next steps. So after this public hearing, we're eager to hear what all of you have to say. We want to take your input. As you may have noticed, if you attended our February 17th community meeting, we did make several changes as a result of the comments we received at that meeting and since that meeting. We're going to take your comments tonight and evaluate those and incorporate those into a perhaps modified plan. Post any revised parking and curb management plan on our project website. Schedule an MTA Board of Directors meeting. We will notify everyone in the neighborhood, as we did for this public hearing, in multiple ways, through letters, through postcards, etc., letting people know how to participate in the Board of Directors meetings, which happen on Tuesdays in the afternoon. If the board approves this plan, it'll take about 4 to 6 months before you see any changes, because it takes a while to order and install signage or pay stations. We will notify residents who currently have Area S or Area R permits on how they will get their HV permits. They will not have to pay twice. If they've already purchased their Area R permits, likely they'll just get an HV permit. We will definitely make it as convenient as possible, so that you're not paying more when you get your HV permit. And we'll likely time it for the time when R or S normally renew. Since we put out the notices for this meeting, and Raynell put up comment sheets on our website, we got a lot of comments, and basically the major concerns expressed so far fall into 4 basic categories. The first is the limit of one permit per household, and it's typically those residents who are in shared housing situations where they have roommates, and you know, both roommates or maybe 3 roommates need a car to get to work or something like that. So there is a concern, and like I said, if there are additional drivers, they can request additional permits, but it would require the MTA to go out, do parking occupancy, et cetera, to make sure that parking is available in the area. Some people expressed concern that this new HV area is going to be too small, that they won't have enough room or enough what we call a parking shed, parking area, enough blocks in which to find parking. Well, it's true that perhaps if they normally parked west of Webster, or maybe they normally parked north of McAllister, they will now, it will be easier for them to find parking, you know, within Hayes Valley, south of McAllister, east of Webster. More of those spaces will be opened up as a result of this, so they won't have to go as far to look for parking. And these buffer zones extend the area even beyond the neighborhood boundaries. So if folks complain that they're still not able to find parking, we can always extend the buffer zones. Those are not carved in stone. Some people expressed the concern that they didn't want meters on their blocks. You know, they're concerned about these single-spaced meters on the blocks that'll be pay or permit. We are not going to be using single-space meters. We will be using these slender, narrow pay stations. There will be one on each block face. So there will not be individual meters. So they are unobtrusive, they blend in. You'll hardly know they're there. Also, we received comments about including portions of the lower Haight into the new HV area. So perhaps folks there maybe are more comfortable staying within their old neighborhood boundaries, but so that is something we will consider as well. And so Hank will summarize questions that we've received during our presentation. As he commented on in the beginning, there is a chat function in Teams live event. So if you've submitted questions or comments, Hank can summarize or try to answer some of those now.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy and Raynell. Really appreciate it. So as the comments have been coming in through the Q&A, thank you very much. There's 26 that are published and there's 6 that are pending. I've been trying to answer them as I go. I couldn't keep up, so there's a few at the end that we'll try to answer on the fly. But I'll just start from the top. There were a couple questions about multi-unit buildings. So, you know, an apartment building or a condo building that's got more than one unit inside the building. Is it one per unit or one permit for the whole building? And the answer is that it's one per unit. So if you're in an apartment in a 20-unit building, then that means that apartment building is eligible for each of the 20 units is eligible for a permit. Question about, does this plan assume that Hayes Valley will continue to be designated as a slow street, and specifically, I guess, Page Street? And the answer is this plan assumes that all existing slow streets and shared spaces, which include, you know, the dining zones that you've seen and the closure of Hayes Street that happens periodically, will continue. So we're assuming that those are going to continue. And that seems to be the way things are going. We don't have sort of a crystal ball to know exactly which streets might stay and which dining zones are going to stay or go, but we have proceeded with the assumption that they're going to stay. was the question, will you be highlighting what has changed since the last community meeting? And then I think a follow-up question saying, I don't see anything that changed. And it's a fair point. There were this is largely the same as what we presented on February 17th. The main differences are the buffer zones that Kathy talked about. So extending the areas where people, if you're on the border of S and this new area, you can park on both blocks. Same thing with the northern border and the southern border as well. So that's a major change. There's been a few tweaks to specific regulations on specific blocks, like for example, meters on the east side of Goff between McAllister and Fulton, because that's essentially the ground floor land uses there are commercial, with I think a laundromat, a bar, a convenience store, that sort of thing. Another question says, will RPP permit holders now be penalized and treated as visitors for parking in existing R, S, and Q zones? So I provided an answer in the chat to that one too. I do think it's important for context to remember that, if you're currently an R permit holder, you cannot park in S. You can go park there for the 2-hour limit, but you can't leave your car there all day with your R permit. It doesn't entitle you to any sort of special privileges. Same thing if you live in S and want to go park in R, or live in S and want to go park in Q or whatever. So the same rules that exist for current RPP parking rules will exist here. We'll just have a new area, and hopefully the buffer zones help with people who are closer to the edges of the areas. I think it's worth it to note also that those buffer zones don't exist right now. That I don't think that there are buffer zones between S and Q or Q and R. So this actually helps soften that a little bit. And again, the idea is that, especially for area S, which has grown so big and it goes all the way from Hayes Valley down to Noe Valley, that people can drive from pretty far away, park their car, still be in area S, leave their car there all day, hop on the train and go downtown to their jobs, or walk to their office building and civic center or something like that. And that doesn't really help anybody who actually lives in this area that we're talking about in or around Hayes Valley, because you have people who don't live in the neighborhood and aren't there to shop or visit anybody. They're just there to take advantage of the fact that it's really close to the train. There's a comment about there's a reason that there's not a lot of on-site parking in these new developments, because the city did not require it. That's a good point. That was part of the Market Octavia plan that Kathy and Raynell talked about. That is something that the planning department, that's a process the planning department led, and I think we see our role really at the MTA as, excuse me, coming along. And now that those buildings are here and there are more coming and there's a lot more demand, and Hayes Valley is more of a destination for people around the city and around the Bay Area, what do we do about all of this demand, both internal and external? And this is the proposal for the best sort of tools we have to deal with that. A question about how much would the RPP permit cost? The cost will be the same as it is now. So it's $152 for an annual permit now. And will this move to virtual permitting? Yes, the entire city, all of RPP permits are moving over the next 12 months to like a digital permit or virtual permit, so that you won't need to put the sticker on your bumper anymore. It's automatically tied to the license plate on your car. Hopefully we think that that'll make things a lot easier for people. It certainly makes it easier to actually get the permit. You don't have to go down to 11 South Van Ness and stand in line. You don't have to wait for the permit to be sent to you in the mail, and you don't have to put an ugly sticker on your bumper every year. So if you'd like more information about that, please email Raynell, and we can provide you with some more information on that. Question says current parking is till 9 p.m. But if you take into account the 2-hour time limit, that really means you can park at 7 and leave your car for the rest of the night. So not happy with the idea that people visiting in the evening will have to pay for parking. So that one's more of a comment. Thank you for that. I think that's directed specifically at the payer permit parking. And while it is true that with payer permit running until 9 p.m., if you arrived at 7, you'd have to pay for 2 hours of parking. The response there is that we hope that the payer permit actually does a better job of opening up spaces. And so the visitor who's coming at 7 p.m. actually has a better chance of actually finding a spot. And we think that there's a lot of value in that even if they have to pay a little bit for a couple of hours until 9 p.m., they'll be glad that they found a spot, that they didn't have to circle around for 15 or 30 minutes trying to find a spot, maybe having to park several blocks away from their destination. Well, question about what if you have two roommates and they both need their cars? I think it's a very good point. That is a limitation, as Kathy mentioned, to this plan, that there are some households where you're going to have to choose who gets the permit, and then other folks are going to have to find another maybe off-street location to park their car. There are exceptions, as Kathy mentioned, if there is a request for a second permit and we go out and do an occupancy survey and there is space available, then you can get a second permit. There's a few questions about will those who live in an apartment on a street that's currently deemed commercial mean that we can't get an RPP permit? So everybody who lives in an address that's in that pink shaded area that was in an earlier slide that shows the outlines of the new area would be eligible for a permit. Even if you live on a block or on a building that's got traditional meters in front of it, you will still be able to get a permit. Another question was, what if we just renewed our S permits? And as Kathy mentioned, we'll make sure that you don't have to double pay. We'll make sure that you get the full value of your permit. Another question about why just one permit per unit, which I talked about earlier. It is sort of intended to get at some of the internal demand as well as the external demand. That if every unit has four permits, 4 cars, that's going to flood a dense neighborhood like Hayes Valley and the surrounding area. What is the approval process ultimately like? And as Kathy mentioned, we are going to take the feedback that we get here. We're going to make updates. We're going to broadcast those updates everywhere we possibly can on the website, via email, via text message, give it to the neighborhood groups to send out to their lists, give it to the District 5 supervisor to send out to his list. And then the next step would be an SFMTA Board of Directors meeting, which is also a public meeting. And these days are also being held online where you can appear and ask questions or make comments. Question about payer permit. Out of area folks with money can stay in a spot all day long. And this seems like it's going to reduce spots for people who use the 2-hour time limit. I think, we are doing this. The reason that we're installing payer permit is because we think that we hope that that's not the case. And we think that that's not the case. And the data that we have shows that the requirement to pay for parking is really what helps people move along. That it's not that the 2-hour limit actually just results in a 2-hour shuffle where people come out every 2 hours and move their car to the next block over. And they end up staying there all day and taking up a spot all day. And that having to pay is what encourages visitors to think about another way to get to the neighborhood. But if somebody actually really needs to drive, and they need to stay for a long time, and I gave a couple of examples like the plumber who's there for 4 hours, or grandma who comes to visit and stay all day, they don't have to run out. The plumber doesn't have to run out and move a car in the middle of a job, which nobody wants. Says I agree with the need for turnover, but the apartments that are above stores are not allowed to get RPP. And again, that's the same answer. If you're in that pink shaded area of the new area HV eligibility, then you're eligible regardless of what the parking regulations are in front of your building. A comment that says, what you're implicitly saying is we should push residents out to make way for burgeoning businesses. And by pushing residents out, I mean that with recognition that the transportation system in the city is nowhere near efficient. The ride sharing system is nowhere near functional, affordable, or sustainable. And the housing prices are insane. You will turn our neighborhood into meter or permit and limit homes to 1 car per address so people can no longer have roommates. Are you telling people who have been living in the neighborhood to leave? Don't you think 2 permits per household would be a bit less punitive? It's a very, very helpful comment that I think makes a lot of sense. I don't have anything to add beyond what I've already said about the 1 per household limit. I will say that the idea is that none of these things would take effect anytime soon. And I think Raynell is at July 1st. We're aiming, if this were to be approved by the MTA board, then the 1 per household limit would apply when?
I believe the 1 per household limit specifically would come in not for the 20. I believe we've settled on the 23 permits if I remember correctly. I don't have it in front of me, but I could
So
double check that.
July 1st, 2022.
Actually, no, I believe it's the 20. Sorry, for 23 for the 24 permits.
Okay.
But I'll double check.
So sometime in July, this would start applying sometime in middle of 2023 or maybe later, as the proposal is now. So at least gives people some time to make adjustments. Somebody who says, as somebody who currently lives on a so-called unregulated street and hence can't get a parking permit, these changes would be a lifesaver. I'm currently stuck moving my car every 2 hours most days. It's incredibly disruptive. On the rare occasion I do manage to find a spot on an unregulated street, I'm then scared to move my car for fear of having to go back to moving every 2 hours. Thank you for that comment. Someone says, I'm curious about how revenue from the new meters will be used. I'd love for it to be funneled into transit and bike, ped, safety improvements for the neighborhood. Well, per the city charter, parking revenues that exceed the cost to actually administer and enforce the parking program do indeed go to transit service. So and meters and citations do generate more money than they cost, and so that is a major way that we fund transit in the city, is through parking revenues. I have lived at the same address for over 25 years. I was once denied a parking permit and not given a reason. Is there a limited amount of permits available? Again, there's not a limit on the total area-wide number of permits, but as we've been talking about, there is this one per household limit. Hopefully, I don't know why you may have been denied in the past, but please reapply, especially if this gets approved, and if you're in that area that I've described, then you'll be eligible. Someone says, Hayes Valley keeps being mentioned. What about the residents of Lower Haight? This will harm us and not benefit us. Why are we included in the new area and lopped off from our neighborhood? We do not park in Hayes Valley and hike our family up the hill to get home. So thank you for that. That matches something, a piece of feedback that we heard a few times in the lead up to the meeting, that this part of this includes the Lower Haight, which really should be sectioned off. So that's really helpful feedback. Someone says, would we have to reapply for permits, or would those of us who already have permits be given the option to switch this new HV sticker? Again, I think we'll figure out the details, but we'll make sure that that you get the full value of a permit that you've already got. So you're not going to have to buy a new permit before your original permit would have expired. There may be some paperwork involved if this gets approved. Someone says, what changed? I don't see anything that changed. I think that's related to an earlier comment, and I addressed a few of the changes that we made since the last community meeting. Given board approval being needed, what is the earliest dates we could apply for a permit in this new area? Kathy, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, if the board approves this at a meeting in June or July, we will not be sending out applications for this brand new area until we can get new signs and pay stations installed, and that would take about 6 months. So the earliest that anything could go into effect would be early 2022. So what we're thinking of is to time this around the time that Area R and Area S normally renew. So something like that. But once this is approved by the board, we'll have plenty of time to work all these logistics out. We've done this before in Dog Patch, where we converted the Dog Patch area from Area X to Area EE, where we sent everyone with an Area X permit and Area EE permit. So this has happened before. It went fairly smoothly. But it just takes time to order the new signs and pay stations and get them all installed. So it's not going to happen overnight.
Thanks, Kathy. So I'll keep running through these, and the reason I'm reading them aloud and saying my answer out loud is that we do have some people on the phone and want to make sure that they can hear all the comments as well. A person says, I don't have a car, but I have a regular overnight guest. Can I get an RPP and give it to him? So currently the answer is you can get visitor permits, but there's a limit of 20 per year. So that's probably not enough if someone is an overnight guest frequently at your home. And this is actually one of the situations where we think pay or permit could be really helpful. That rather than having to walk, or find your way down to 11 South Van Ness, the customer service center, and buy 20 permits and hang them in the car and be able to predict how many you're going to need that year or that month or whatever, that your overnight guests can just come and pay for whatever hours they need. Most hours overnight are still free. Under the proposal, the pay or permit would run from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And so anything in those 12 hours between 9 p.m. and the next morning are free. It says, how often does someone with an RPP need to move their car outside of street cleaning times? Is it 72 hours currently? It is. If you're not in RPP, if there's sort of an unregulated block, there still is the 72-hour regulation. That comes from the California Vehicle Code. And that's really aimed mostly at trying to get at abandoned vehicles and giving the city some way of moving cars that maybe have been abandoned or aren't going anywhere at all. Someone says, thank you for your work on this. Just wanted to voice support for this plan. Space is at an extreme premium. We should prioritize space for people, bikes, and public transit. Thank you for that. The time for permit parking is 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. There's a problem if you come home before 6 p.m. and may get a ticket. Again, that if you're coming home, then that implies that you live in the area, and in that case, you would be eligible for a permit, and so you wouldn't have to worry about the 2-hour limit or the payment required from pay or permit. You would have your permit sticker, and you'd be good to go. If you don't have a permit and you are parking on a 2-hour block, then as somebody pointed out earlier, it's essentially free after 7 p.m. And you don't have to move again until the next morning. If you're at a pay or permit block, then you pay for a couple hours, 7 to 9 p.m., and then it's free after that. Someone says, are there documented cases of people driving from farther out in S to have a shorter commute? I lived here 26 years and never heard this. And if true, isn't this an issue of unreliable public transportation to get to work? We don't have a lot of data on this.
We actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We do have data on this. We did a survey.
I'm trying to go too fast, please.
Yeah, we found we did. I don't remember exactly what the sample size and the percentages were, but we found. I think it was 10 cars out of. It wasn't even the entire neighborhood. It was a subset of the neighborhood. We found. This was pre-pandemic in July 2019, I think. So we do have. It's not a huge percentage. It's not as high as the percentage of non-permit parkers, but there are quite a few people that we found that were parking in the Hayes Valley area, but lived, much further away, not just in like DuBose Triangle, but even further west and south.
Great, thank you. So I was going through. There's a few more new chats coming in, so making sure those get published. Someone says, how do we stop this from happening? So come to this meeting and express your opposition, and I would say send us an email that says that you oppose it. And if you want to come to the MTA board meeting where this is heard, I think that's another good way to express that you are opposed. I think to the extent that there are specific pieces that if there are things that you like and things that you don't like, it's always really helpful for us to know the details and the specifics, because we do want to take feedback and we do want to shape the plan based on what we're hearing. It's hard to do any shaping if it's just a blanket, I don't want any of this to happen. Of course, if you don't want any of this to happen, let us know that too. This says, what if a household currently has 2 permits? Do they lose one? Which one? That's a good question. We talked about that under the proposal, moving down to 1 per household wouldn't happen until 2023. So there's some time to prepare. And then I think in that case, it would be up to the household which one they wanted to keep and which one they wanted to give up.
Or apply for a second.
Right. And of course, yeah, always that option to apply for a second one. Thanks, Kathy. There are so many families with 2 working adults that need cars. Shall they move out? Again, good question, good point about the one per household and some of the limitations. So thank you for that comment. You said the meters could be placed in six-ish months, but then the 1 car per household limit only starts in 2023. Would those of us unregulated streets now be able to get a permit as soon as those meters are placed, or do we have to wait until 2023? I'm confused. Sorry for the confusion. If this goes to the MTA board and the MTA board approves, this proposal or a modified proposal that we've adjusted based on feedback, they'll be approving both the creation of the new RPP area and the specific regulations on specific blocks, which includes that pay or permit. So the answer is you would be eligible before the pay or permit meters go in. We're not going to have required payment go in on a block where those residents haven't had an opportunity to actually get a permit. So you will be able to get a permit that will exempt you from meters if you live on one of those pay or permit blocks. Says maybe start with returning to required parking for new developments. I think that's a good point. I will say that is outside of the SFMTA's purview. That's the planning department and the board of supervisors, excuse me, making those decisions. I don't think that things are going in that direction just as a city. I mean, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors about a year ago approved a move to eliminating parking minimums throughout the city. So there are no parking minimums anywhere in San Francisco anymore. It used to be only select neighborhoods like Hayes Valley had no parking minimums. So I don't think that that's the direction we're going. And then again, that's why we feel like it's really important to come in and try to do more with the existing on-street supply that we have, because we're not going to be increasing the off-street supply even as we increase the number of people who live in and visit the area. So this is timing of when this is implemented is not so much the problem as the project itself. Thanks for that comment. And again, to the extent that you want to provide details in an email, that's really helpful for us, helping us shape it. I thought it was said that post-board approval would be 6 months for signs to start, but you just said July 2023 for effective date. So why is this going to take so long? So apologies that, clearly I'm creating some confusion here. The board would be approving the new RPP area, the new pay or permit blocks, a couple of new meters, and all of the curb management changes that Raynell described. What we're saying is that limit of 1 per household, we would basically delay that taking effect, specifically so that people could have a couple of years to prepare, to figure out, if they already have more than 1 RPP permit per household, how are they going to go about moving to a 1 per household environment? And so that's why. So all of the regulations would go into place. It's just that 1 per household limit, we would specifically delay that by a couple of years. Comment says Hayes Valley is 99% residential. Why are we getting penalized for the 1%? Again, we hope this doesn't seem like a penalty. A lot of these are trying to provide more parking for the existing residents, making things a little easier, making it so that folks aren't commuting in from outside the neighborhood and leaving their cars on the streets all day. But thank you for the comment. Another person says, so the pink new RPP for HV will be allowed to get a permit. So yeah, if your address is in that pink shaded area, then you would be part of the new HV area and eligible for a permit. What's the estimated dollar per hour for metered parking? That's a great question, and we don't have that's a hard question to answer, because in San Francisco we do block by block demand responsive pricing. So you may know that if you go to Hayes Street, the price on the 400 block of Hayes is different at 9 in the morning than it is at 3 p.m. And the price on the 400 block of Hayes is different than what it is on the 500 block of Hayes. So typically what we do is we look at the average prices in the area and use that to set the prices of any new meters that we install. For these pay or permit meters, we'll be setting them distinctly lower than what the meters on the commercial streets are, because the assumption is that the demand is going to be lower on a residential street than it is, right in front of all the businesses on Hayes. But we haven't settled on an exact number, but that's a great question, and I think the next time we send out an update, we will have proposed rates for the meters. Another question about the Market Octavia plan. Why are we rewarding developers who honored? Are we rewarding developers who honored our community request to have fewer parking spaces? But as a community, we are to absorb the negative benefit of developers reaping the cost of not building parking spaces. Again, thanks for the comment. Like I said, that's more of a planning department purview, and general city policy of sort of trying to restrict parking in new buildings. We go through and look at. There's a few more new ones that have come in. Okay, says not everyone that lives in the area gets a permit though. Again, if you are within the borders of the new HV area, then your address would be eligible for a permit. I live in Lower Haight. I ask that you reduce parking capacity because the huge volume of cars is loud and dangerous where I am. Okay, thank you. Why doesn't SFMTA apply RPP to the whole city? It sounds like that would make millions of dollars and would make parking easier for everyone. It's an interesting idea, and one that we've sort of discussed in the past. It's kind of outside the scope of this project, but if you're interested, there will be more on that topic on just sort of like reforms to the RPP program generally coming over the next several months. This policy would add to the financial burden of many of the low-income residents of the area. Thank you for that comment. Business in Hayes Valley will be dampened and deterred with implementation of evening and Sunday metering. Not all people use taxi, metro, and Uber services in their travels. Deterrents to these mode shift options include, but not limited to, personal safety, timing, convenience, and physical disabilities. Another is the hassle factor. Let's just go home and eat dinner. I have moved the car twice now. We must retain a variety of travel options in Hayes Valley and the city. Thank you for that. The reason behind the extended meter hours proposal is really, as Raynell discussed earlier, that meters are basically the best tool that we have to actually create availability so that customers who want to come to business, to the commercial core and shop and eat and all that can actually find a spot. And the 6 p.m. cutoff time and the free on Sundays is really just a relic of what businesses were, when businesses were open back in the 1940s. And things are open later, and Sunday is almost as busy as Saturday these days. So we actually hope that this will make it easier for people to find parking, that they'll avoid the issue of like circling around, not being able to find anything and just giving up and going home. So that's the idea.
And also, Hank,
yeah,
the research shows that resale sales tax revenues go up in areas where we have demand responsive pricing, so that it actually has demonstrated to help businesses, not hinder them, because of the additional availability of parking that's opened up through greater turnover.
Yeah, thank you. So there's two more, and I'm gonna say these are the last two. I should note that we will publish all of the comments that come in, and responses to those on the website after this. So even if we're not able to get to everything.
Yeah, and real quick, we've already have published all of the emails and the comments that I've received from when this version of the plan went online in April 13th, up until last night. And we've got some comments that have come in today, and we'll make sure to get those up as well. And then also the phone, we'll be getting phone comments once you're all done.
Right.
With the
I promise this will be the last two. We'll cut it off here. Thanks everybody for bearing with us. Why not include an annual Muni Pass with RPP? Charge $1,000 for parking each year. Another really interesting idea. Thank you for that. And I think again, outside the scope of this project, but stay tuned for more on possible updates to the RPP program generally. And then finally, why isn't the 350 block of Goff Street considered residential, even though there are apartments on it above the stores and restaurants? And I think it's a good question. We generally, in terms of what the regulation is on the actual street in front of the buildings is based on what the ground floor land use is, and that's true in almost every San Francisco neighborhood. Most San Francisco neighborhoods are mixed use, right? You know, there's stores, and even on the commercial streets, there's stores and restaurants on the bottom floor, and then there are apartments or houses up above. But like I said, right now, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, is a 300 block of Goff, would that be eligible under the proposed area HV? We can go back and look at the.
I think as it currently stands, it's on the line. I think it would depend on which side of Goff.
Okay, well, that's one that we can look into the specifics and get back to you on. But if you have specific questions about your specific eligibility on your block, please email Raynell and we'll get back to you. So with that, thank you very much. And like I said, even if we weren't able to answer everything, we will do so. We will provide all the comments and questions and answers, both that came through this chat and that came through before the public hearing on the website. So over to you, Rudy, to check to see if there's anybody on the phone line.
Thank you, Hank and Raynell and Catherine. Looks like we have 12 participants or 12 in the queue. So we'll start the call session right now.
You have one question remaining.
I have a question, and it actually came up in the chat about the Market Octavia and the benefits of where we as a neighborhood did reduce parking as a cost benefit to developers. You earlier answered that was a planning issue. To me, I take contest with that, and I'd have to pose that to Jason, who runs the HB&A TNT, that it's not a benefit. It's like you as SFMTA were part of the Market Octavia, was to make my neighborhood a walkable and livable neighborhood. And I asked that question about the development that forgo reduced parking, how are they going to get the residents to buy into that of where less cars? And I don't think you answered that quite appropriate.
Thank you, caller.
Yes.
Oh, questions will be answered at the end of the at the end of the call. Give me a moment here.
You have one question remaining.
Caller, go ahead.
Hi, I'm just sharing a comment. I want to reiterate how helpful this is going to be for those of us who are currently on unregulated streets. It's virtually impossible for us to live here. I'm a student and I have to go out and move my car every 2 hours. It's incredibly disruptive, and as another commenter noted, once you do manage to find one of those very, very elusive parking spaces on a so-called unregulated street, you never want to move your car, which of course defeats the purpose of having a car and means that parking spaces are harder to come by for everyone. So while I certainly understand people's concerns about this very, this significant limit of one car per household, and I think that there should be probably some consideration of bumping that up to 2. I very much support this.
Thank you, caller.
You have 0 questions remaining.
There are no more callers on the line.
And
All right.
Hank, I don't know if you wanted to respond to the first comment.
No, go ahead. If you have a thought, please go for it.
Oh no, I'll let you go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, I think that was about expanding. Like, let's reconsider the fact that we don't allow that we don't have parking minimums in new developments in Hayes Valley. And again, that is, you know, I hate saying, you know, that's not my department, because it sound like a bureaucrat, but that is indeed that's not our department. That is the planning department that runs those processes. And the Market Octavia plan was the result of like a pretty extensive public process over many years, where the outcome was that we do in fact want to limit the number of parking spaces that new buildings build, and it's based on data from both from San Francisco and the Bay Area and around the country that shows that it's really a field of dreams. If you build it, they will come situation. If you build a lot of parking, then people will bring cars, and if you don't, then they won't. And you know, San Francisco as a city has made the decision that we want to try to encourage people to move to places where they're not going to bring a car, and especially places like Hayes Valley, where you are very close to the subway. There's lots of transit bus lines running through. It's flat. It's accessible to a job center by walking, with Mid-Market and Civic Center and those sorts of places. So I think that's the thinking. But again, you know, we really view our role at the MTA is to come along now that those larger city decisions have been made. Our role is to try to manage the very limited parking capacity and curb space that there is remaining in the best way that we can.
If I can
go ahead.
Add something. We've done extensive research on the demand for parking by housing type. And what we found is that residents of multifamily buildings or higher density buildings, taller buildings, are least likely to actually own a car. So residents in single family homes are the most likely. In fact, people with garages are the most likely to not only own a vehicle, but get an RPP permit. So the folks in apartment buildings add less demand to parking than a lot of people think. But there's always going to be folks in the apartment buildings that desperately need a car in order to get to their jobs. And as you know, many of the new buildings that are being built in Hayes Valley are for low-income families. And the only way that these buildings are financially feasible, the only way they got built in the first place, is by not having to pay for the parking. And that makes them affordable, that makes more housing available, and those who absolutely need that car to access employment opportunities, they need a place to park. So what we're trying to do with this plan is open up the eligibility to these RPP permits to new residents and old residents alike.
Thanks, Kathy. And I think there may be some more people on the line. Rudy, can you maybe reread the instructions for how people can get themselves in the queue to make
Certainly.
a public comment?
You can call, just a moment here, to make a public comment. I'd like to remind everyone that the number is 1-888-363-4734, and then go ahead and enter the code 7014320. You will be placed in Q&A, and to provide a public comment, please press 1, then 0, and your call will be answered. So I will go and check right now.
Thank you. Actually, maybe we'll wait a few moments just to give people an opportunity to get in the queue. And there are a couple of more. Actually, one question that we got that came in through the Q&A is, you keep referring to these email addresses, but they're not in. Where are they? Kathy, could you share your screen and go back to the screen where all the email addresses are? That's probably pretty helpful for people.
I think we forgot to put them.
Okay. Well, I will
here.
put them. I'll put them in the response to that question in the Q&A. We've gotten a couple questions about if you live in a buffer zone, are you able to choose which one? Like if you're in a buffer zone between S and HV, can you choose which one you get to join? The answer to that is no. There is a line between S and HV in terms of eligibility, and so you're either on the S side of the line or the HV side of the line, and then the signs are what create the buffer zone. So the signs say, 2-hour parking except HV or S permits. And so whichever one you have, you can park on those buffer zone blocks. So yeah, Rudy, you want to check the phone line again?
Certainly.
You have 2 questions remaining.
Caller, go ahead.
Actually, I have to pose to Kathy and my previous question about the we as neighbors agree to the Market Octavia plan to have density, but at the same time to have SFMTA to step up. So for you to push it off to the planning department, and I'd actually have to say it's like, Jason, if you're on this line, I work with the HV&A TNT. It's like, that's not what we were about. We're about how are you going to address the density with transit? I don't see that in your plan. I can talk to you, Renell. It's like, I chatted with you earlier about all of your different objectives that you're doing in our neighborhood. But what I'm not seeing is a major plan of how you're reducing our transit in our neighborhood.
Thank you, caller.
You have 1 question remaining.
Caller, go ahead, please.
Okay, good evening. This is Jason Henderson, Chair of the HV&A Transportation and Planning Committee and also co-chair of the Market and Octavia CAC. We've been talking about this for over 15 years. It's part of the Market and Octavia plan. So let's get on with it. I think the idea of limiting the RPP for 1 per household is an excellent idea. There's a lot of things going on with that, and there's people who are parking on the street because their garage is full and things like that. So we need to be real careful about that. I think the buffers are a very good compromise. So I'm glad to see that's been worked into this, and I also think that I support the inclusion of that small part of the lower Haight because it's a buffer zone. It's kind of like I live actually right there, and so I think it's good that you include that, and it makes sense geographically. So again, this is consistent with the Market and Octavia plan. This part of the city cannot survive economically by depending on single occupant vehicles coming in. These businesses are walkable businesses. These are transit oriented businesses. I urge you to lobby the state to allow the RPP prices to go up. I think that the biggest shame here is that it really is under priced. There are a lot of different things we can be doing with the curb, and there's this kind of sense of entitlement that that the curb should be freely available to a private car storage approach. So I think people need to really step back and think about that. And this is a good geography. It's been a long time coming. It's been talked about for over 20 years. The Market and Octavia plan was adopted in 2009, and this revenue will go to Muni, and that's critically important. And don't forget that a substantial percentage of people in this neighborhood are car free and have to kind of put up with the noise and pollution and traffic of cars. And the city's transit first policies, its climate emergency declaration 2 years ago. I mean, this lines up with that. So just I'd like to see this done sooner rather than later, and it's time. So I appreciate all the work you guys have done. It looks great. Let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you, caller.
You have 0 questions remaining.
Currently, there are no questions in the queue.
Okay. A couple more. I think there's a couple more comments have come in through the Q&A, which I'll try to address, and then I think we will call it a night. So thank you so much. One is about the lower Haight, and what's the likelihood that you would actually remove this little section of the lower Haight from the proposed zone? I think I really appreciate that feedback. It's probably the thing we've heard most is asking to remove that little section from the proposed area. I can't, we would need to go back and talk amongst ourselves and talk with the city traffic engineer about their thoughts on that. But I think the fact that it's the thing that we've heard the most will weigh pretty strongly when we're considering feedback and making adjustments. So I certainly appreciate that. And then a couple questions about a lot of questions about the buffer zone, and people saying they would rather remain in. Someone says the buffer zone would not appear to benefit those on the boundary of this new zone, but rather allow those who remain in the S permit area to continue to park where they always have, without any impact. Excuse me. And then someone says people in the buffer zone should be able to choose. It does not make sense geographically. We've lived on Webster and Waller for 10 years. I can assure you I've never ever parked my car in the Hayes Valley zone, aside from on the tiny portion that is actually lower Haight, south of Haight. So again, thank you for that comment. Like I said, it's common that a refrain that we've heard, and so we really appreciate it. And I think with that, I'll publish these. I'll make sure that these get published, and then, like I said, we'll be publishing all of the comments, the calls, the emails, everything that we got with our best responses, and then, in a couple weeks, look for a revised plan coming out in all the ways that we can blast it out. So thank you everybody for your time. We really appreciate you being here, and we know that this is extremely important to you as folks who live and work in Hayes Valley and the surrounding area. Thanks, Rudy. Thank you, Kathy and Raynell. And without further ado, we will say good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you for participating. There's no, so we're going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting this evening. Thank you all again. The hearing is now adjourned.